Hi, welcome to another episode of Being Me, a self-awareness toolbox. I'm your host, Caroline Gaiduma, and it's always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for the conversations that you've been having on our platform. Thank you for sharing, for liking, for subscribing, and for clicking the notification button. So on this episode, we are excited to talk about mindfulness. And with us on set, we have David Beatty. He's a mindfulness facilitator. Thank you for coming.
Hi.
Welcome on set. So tell us a little bit about yourself and...
Yes, I'll try and keep it brief. That's a long story.
Yeah.
I was, as you probably know, for most of my life a photographer and did a lot of traveling.
Yes.
I was born after the Second World War, so a lot of my generation grew up in the 60s, and you've probably heard about the infamous 60s when we felt that there was something very dissatisfactory about industrial growth society, as we used to call it, the military-industrial complex. You know, that it was all about production and consumption, regimentation, and we rebelled against that. And we also felt there was a kind of spiritual vacuum in the society.
Yeah.
So a lot of people began looking east because they found in some of these Eastern philosophies and practices something that might be able to address some of these issues.
Yeah.
And it was all part of a cultural movement. There were poets and writers who wrote about these things and went east, and Gary Snyder and Allen Ginsberg and so on. So I became very interested in that. And I did in fact do quite a bit of traveling in 1970-71. I went through Africa overland, taking passengers basically with a colleague, and then ended up in India and came back. And the 70s I was working as a photographer and also a bit involved with a colleague in making some documentary films and things.
Yeah.
But these other, the traveling really opened my eyes to that, what was going on in the world. And we were in that post-colonial period, and it seemed to me that there was a lot of hope and expectation in these countries, but there was also a great deal of that was problematic. So I was asking a lot of very big questions, and I was also going through a kind of re-education on my own, as it were. And by the end of the 70s, I went through a really big crisis. My marriage fell apart, and I went to India as a photographer because I was doing photography by then. And I thought I needed to really start looking at things somehow more deeply. And I met a Buddhist monk in Sri Lanka who gave me permission to stay on a very small Buddhist hermitage island on a lagoon in southern far in the south of the country. It only had 3 monks staying there, and there was no electricity, no modern conveniences or anything like that. I was given a simple hut with a tiled roof. It was a bit dilapidated. The place was full of wildlife, you know, giant monitor lizards and enormous tree snakes that slid overhead when you were brushing your teeth at the well. It was very, very simple. And I just stayed there, and one of the monks taught me some basic breathing meditation, and he also taught me walking meditation, which was interesting. But otherwise I was pretty much left on my own. But it was my first contact with the Theravada Buddhist tradition, from which mindfulness in fact comes.
Oh, okay.
Many of these people that became teachers in the West and are still teachers did what they went east, and some of them became monks in Thailand and places. They learned some of these practices and they came back to the West, and they took off their robes and they became lay teachers. And that was how the Insight Meditation Society in Barre in USA, Massachusetts, was started in the 70s. And the mindfulness, contemporary secular mindfulness program that's most well known in the West is the MBSR program, which stands for Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction.
Okay.
And that was created
Yeah.
as an 8-week course by a man called John Kabat-Zinn, who was a doctor and biochemist at the Massachusetts Medical Institute. He had been going on these insight meditation retreats, particularly with 2 people, Christina Feldman and Christopher Titmuss, who's a well-known Dharma teacher in England. And he had some kind of vision at some point doing this, that he could create a course that would use these methods of contemplation and meditation to help the patients in the hospital who were suffering from pain, chronic pain, and also post-operative stress or pre-operative stress and this kind of thing. So he created the 8-week program.
Yeah, and that's the one you did?
What I did was, when I came to Kenya, which was quite a long time ago, in the early part of the millennium here, I met a Buddhist monk who was Canadian, but he'd actually done his ordination in Sri Lanka, so we had a lot in common to talk about, because I'd been going to Sri Lanka for over 15 years as a photographer while the ethnic conflict was problematic. And he had weekly sessions in a doctor's house in Hurlingham. So I also became interested in the fact that there was this mindfulness training going on in England in this new form. So I thought, well, maybe I should do some of that, because I have this background of interest in Buddhist philosophy, and also a certain amount of practice I've done. I understand where it comes from. Maybe I should do this and perhaps see if anyone in Kenya is interested in participating in this, because it seemed that there were growing levels of stress and so on in the society, particularly after 2008 financial collapse and so on. And there were all these ecological problems, which is another bent of mine. I'm very concerned about the ecological crisis, and I had done work in the Tana River Delta, and I gave a talk in the National Museum of Kenya. It was more of an interactive discussion. With about 60 people came, I think, on deep ecology, which concerns much our inner relationship with ecology, not just ecology as a science. You know? So all these things sort of came together, and so I went to a mindfulness teacher's training course to create agents of change, and that was some years back with Christopher Titmuss. I did the MBSR teacher training program, and I also went to the Karuna Institute in Devon, which was an interesting place. For 30 years they had been blending Buddhist psychology with Western psychotherapy, and produced something called core process psychology, which is very interesting. But I was really there doing a relational mindfulness course, because the relational mindfulness I felt was very important. You know, the interpersonal mindfulness, like between you and me here and now, rather than a solo practice when you're looking just at your own solitary experience, which is enormously valuable. So then I started holding small groups here some years back, around 2014, 2015.
And we've talked about mindfulness, and you know, I'm sure the viewer is thinking, what exactly is mindfulness? So how can you describe mindfulness to somebody who's hearing it for the first time?
Yes, that's such a huge topic, but I think it's important to make a distinction, because we have to respect where it comes from. It comes from a 2,600-year-old practice that was very specifically, pragmatically laid out. Otherwise it wouldn't exist. That is part of a whole body of teaching that addresses all the main issues in life. So there's a distinction to be made between MBSR, for example, or some of these therapeutic mindfulness courses and practices in the West, and mindfulness as a whole way of living your life, which liberates you from all your conditioning. I mean, that's a much bigger agenda. Just to explain it more specifically, there are said to be 3 kinds. We're talking about stress. People have anxiety and they have stress.
Yeah.
So stress is a form of suffering, obviously.
Yes.
So we're talking about suffering at the end of the day.
Yeah.
There are three kinds of suffering. One is called the suffering of suffering, and I'll explain what that is. I'll give you a simple example.
Yeah.
Say you wake up one morning and there's this kind of sad feeling you've got inside you.
Yeah.
You're not quite sure why or what. But the mind picks up on this, right?
Yeah.
And then the mind proliferates around it. So you end up being unhappy about being unhappy.
Yeah.
It's called the two arrows. There's the first arrow, which is the sensation.
Yes.
Then the second arrow, the mind creates it.
Yes.
So you've got a bigger problem.
Yeah.
So that's the one kind. The second kind is suffering about change. That's to say, impermanence, transiency are facts of life.
Yeah.
But often we find this difficult. There's the time of our lifespan, moving from a beginning to an end.
To an end, yeah.
There's anxiety about time in terms of I'm achieving something or am I not achieving something in time.
Yeah.
There's the fact that even though we may accept that everything changes, there's a little part of us somewhere that craves permanence.
Permanence, yeah.
And that's usually attached to something which, if you acquire it, it's just as likely you will lose it. And then there's suffering connected with time.
Yeah.
The third form is a more kind of existential suffering, which is about the human condition in a much bigger sense. And that is actually the basis of the other two forms of suffering at the end of the day, because it's concerned with our mortality, the fact that we are kind of convinced that there's a self-existing entity called me that is continuous from the beginning to the end of my life, which is a kind of delusion.
Yeah.
Now, the MBSR therapeutic forms of mindfulness that are popular, they really deal mainly with the first kind and a little bit with the second kind, but they rarely touch upon the third.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that gives an idea of where you call it a therapy and where you might call it something as a spiritual path.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay?
Definitely. So let's talk about the therapeutic kind, because on Being Me, we want to share with people as many therapeutic modalities as possible that they may choose from when they want to go for their mental and emotional wellness. So as a therapeutic, mindfulness form, how would a session look like of mindfulness?
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we do a short one right now with you and me?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so what we do is we begin, the very first thing we do is to focus on the breathing. That's the first step. So, okay, if you just find a comfortable way of sitting, keeping your feet on the ground, a relaxed posture, the back as straight as possible, without, do it as effortlessly as possible, without force. Maybe close your eyes and bring your attention to your breathing. We just follow the natural rhythm of the body's breathing and focus your attention on the in-breath and the out-breath. Just that. We're not trying to force the breathing into any particular rhythm, we're just allowing ourselves to pay attention. Breathing in, breathing out. You might, for instance, focus your attention on the sensation of air passing through the nostrils or lips, or you might focus your attention on the rise and fall of the abdomen. Just keeping your attention there a minute. And you may also be aware of bodily sensations, a tingling in your left foot or something, a warm feeling in your stomach, You just notice these things. And if your mind, which it probably will, wanders off into some story or thought, you notice when that happens, and without reprimanding yourself, because there's nothing wrong with that, you gently bring your attention back to the breathing and focus on the breath again. And every time you find your mind wandering, again and again, you bring it back gently to the breathing. Okay, open your eyes if you like, so I can't make this too long. So it's really as simple as that.
Wow.
And then the exploration begins from the level of sensation to feelings, emotions, and thoughts. So we go through a process of cultivating awareness.
Yeah.
Now, awareness is a natural capacity that everybody has. But strangely, throughout our education, no one mentions this fact.
It's true.
We are taught how to use the brain as a thinking machine and an information storage machine, but no one ever mentions the faculty of awareness.
Yeah.
Which is quite extraordinary, and when you think it's one of the most obvious things about us.
Yeah. And it feels like, going through what you've just taken me through, it feels like, at the beginning it felt like, it feels odd because that's not the normal way of our daily life. So it feels odd to sort of slow down and go within, and you find that there's a level of resistance that happens because you're trying not to think, but then the thinking seems as if it's not in your control.
Yeah, well, it isn't. And some people think that meditation and things like that is something to do with getting rid of your thoughts. A lot of people think this.
Yes.
It's nothing to do with that. That's complete misconception.
Yeah.
Minds think, that's what they're there for.
Yeah.
So all it is training the mind to notice when it wanders away from the breath.
Yeah.
So that if you do this repeatedly over a period of time, what will happen is you'll find that the mind settles down more easily. Right?
Yeah.
And that is necessary as a first step. Why? Because when the mind is settled down, you will have more clarity to look deeper into patterns of thoughts, emotions, feelings. Say, for example, I use a simple example, a glass of water that's slightly cloudy with some dust or mud or something, and you've shaken it up. You can't see through it, right?
Yes, yes.
Just keep it still for a minute here. All that dust will settle to the bottom and you'll have a clear view through the water.
Through the water, yes.
It's very like that with the mind.
Yes.
So the next step, and the part of this step is not, because we breathe all the time, but we're not really necessarily aware of it unless we've just been running up the stairs. We say we are knowing what is arising while it is arising without preference. Okay?
Without judgment. Is that judgment?
I prefer the word preference, but that's what it means.
Yeah.
The second sense of mindfulness is realizing what is happening while it is happening without preference. The difference between the knowing and the recognizing, or the recognizing, is that the first step, we're just with the experiences as they arise. The second step is after that dust has settled to the bottom, we have some clarity, and we start to recognize repeated patterns arising, which may have been there for years.
Yeah.
And then you start having insight. So there's the stilling of the mind, and then there's the insight.
That comes after the mind has been stilled.
Yes, hopefully.
Awesome. I want us to go on a break, and that's really important because you have mentioned about patterns, and we are talking about emotional and mental well-being, awareness of patterns. So when we come back after the break, we'll talk about what are the foundations of mindfulness. What is it that you must know so that you understand how mindfulness works and why it's good for you. So we are going to go on a break, and don't go anywhere. Stay right there. Welcome back to this episode of Being Me, a show that is a self-awareness toolbox, and we are talking about all the wellness and healing modalities that help you secure your mental and emotional well-being. And in today's episode, we're talking about mindfulness with Beatty. And before we went on a break, we talked about the importance of awareness. I'd like you to talk to the viewer about why is mindfulness so key, to have as something to help you in your well-being.
Okay, when we're cultivating this awareness, we're observing our experience. So that's the first thing. We've already discussed that, and knowing that we are looking, right? That's not yet mindfulness. It's getting towards it. There's also the awareness that we might be observing through the filter or the colouring of an attitude, which might be an expectation, it might be aversion, or it might be wanting, and it will be a kind of feeling that's behind a thinking process, for example, which we weren't aware of. So the second step, as it were, is to be aware of that. So there's awareness of what's arising, there's awareness of an attitude. That
Is
might
this
be
what
there.
you are calling preference?
Yeah, but the attitude will be colouring what we're looking at. That's still not mindfulness, because a mindful moment, like let's say for example we were dealing with anger, and all these sensations arise in the body, and we feel and we're sitting there with trying to cultivate this awareness of this. There'll be a moment when we recognize that's anger. In that moment of recognition, you will notice your mind is not angry. You've labeled it anger. And a second later, it might all rush back in. A moment of mindfulness itself is always wholesome. This is what you have to pay attention to. I said when your mind wanders off from the breath, and you're suddenly in a train of thought, you're halfway through the train of thought and you didn't even notice the first half, you wondered how you got there. When you notice, the moment you notice, that split second when you notice, oh, I'm in that train of thought, and you come back to the breath, that is a moment of mindfulness. It's a space that is not conditioned. Right? It's always wholesome. That space allows you to make wise choices. Because you're looking to see whether you are making a wholesome choice or an unwholesome choice. As an interesting fact, you might have some obsessive things going on in your mind, right? You might be pondering over certain issues frequently. The interesting thing is, the more you ponder over a particular thing, the more it will become the inclination of your mind. So you are self-conditioning. And to recognize that that's happening means you can let go of it. So there's also that aspect of it. So you deepen this exploration of awareness, and awareness starts showing you that you're living in this complex web of experience, most of which you hardly previously had known was going on. And the more you notice, the more you disidentify with these negative emotions or storylines or obsessive issues that keep creating more suffering. It's a process of opening up and disidentifying from these. It's like when negative emotions arise, right, why we pay attention to the sensations in the body is whatever's arising in the mind will follow the flow of the bodily sensation. The mind is actually reacting to the bodily sensations. And by doing so, it's creating more suffering. So when you focus just on the sensation and put your awareness there, the sensation isn't making judgments. The mind picks up and then makes all kinds of issues out of it. Judgments, negative and positive, and then creates more suffering. So the more you become aware of this, the more you disidentify, and you're able to see that this awareness can shine a light on this experience, but create a space where you don't get caught up in all this negativity and proliferate your own suffering, which then has consequences in terms of what you say to somebody, of how you react to a situation. So you're moving from reacting to responding. There's a space between something that comes in and your normal reaction, which is instantaneous, and putting a space where you can momentarily look at this and make a wise response.
Wow.
But it takes a bit of training, because we're not given any training like this. We're just taught to think in school.
Yeah. And the practice that you've just helped me, you know, the few seconds that we've done it, and what you call awareness, as you're saying, is like a split of a second. Does practice elongate it?
It slowly, it begins with this sudden realization that something different happened in that split moment. And then as you do this practice more and more, that space begins to become more present more of the time in your life, so that you can go about your daily life with less reactivity. It's very important to make this point that we don't compartmentalize mindfulness as you're 30 minutes sitting on a cushion every morning at 8 o'clock and the rest of your life is chaotic. The whole point of the course, the 8-week course, is to take mindfulness into your daily life. So we have formal and informal practices. You do 2 hours a week with the facilitator, which is the formal practice, step by step, and you're given home assignments, which is the informal practice. You're asked to write down and notice certain things that are going on, and you take it into your life. So it's not just when you're sitting meditation or walking meditation you're doing this stuff. You're doing it when you're washing up. You're doing it when you're, so that you can wash up without irritation. Oh, I must get this washing up. You can enjoy the washing up just by being focused on the soap suds, the sound. You can actually enjoy that by being not thinking, having an expectation, I want this to end in the next 2 minutes. So you're training yourself to remain present to what is unfolding now, without thinking about the future consequences or reminiscing about the past, so that you remain more focused and attentive to what you're doing.
Awesome. So in your practice, in however long you've done this, what are some of the things that you can say you've seen mindfulness solving in people's lives, or even your own life?
I'll come to that in a second. I'll just mention one more thing, is that this is evidence-based in the MBSR program, because they have a lot of neuroscientific data. And generally, the 8 weeks is important, because generally, in most cases, a shift definitely takes place, which is, in a sense, measurable, around the 6th or 7th week. So that's how much you have to do before a shift will actually happen. So that's one thing. So in terms of people there was a lady who was suffering from panic attacks and back pain, and she was actually seeing a well-known psychotherapist here. And that lady knows me, the psychotherapist, so she suggested this person, maybe she would come on one of my some of my mindfulness sessions. I wasn't actually doing the 8-week course then. It was very hard to get people to sign up to 8 weeks for some reason, so there was a 4-week one. But she came, and afterwards, I think she put a testimonial on my website. She said that these panic attacks and the back pain disappeared. This made a huge difference, being able to do this practice. And she loved the body scan, which is a lying down meditation where you scan through your body. And she still does that. Interestingly, there was another lady who came on a course last year. She had been caught up in the Westgate terror attack. She didn't tell me that before, I didn't know. She went through the whole 8-week course and loved it. And after it was over, she came and told me, you know, ever since that thing happened, I had counselling and everything, because I was in Art Cafe when they all started shooting and stuff. She said, I had this floaty feeling of being slightly disembodied all this time, and that was about 6 years.
Wow.
And she said, after this 8-week course, it's all gone. So that's the importance of the embodiment, being in touch with the sensations of the body, feeling embodied, because the mind and body is a single process. They're not two separate things. They're interrelated in complex ways. So being embodied is very important.
Wow. And at this particular point, we are going through a pandemic, and a lot of people are going through a lot of trauma, a lot of life changes. What would you say to people at this point from a mindfulness perspective?
Right. Well, this is very important. I'm hoping that there's another colleague of mine who's, I think she's running a course online at the moment. We did together do, for a group of people who we know, who are familiar with this, an online thing at the beginning of May, I think it was. I think what I could say, I think I had an idea of putting out something where somebody could contact me for help in that kind of situation. We were offering this 1-hour session for free, you know, under the circumstances, which is fine. I think it should be. But obviously, an 8-week course is something else. But maybe I'll get back to you on that as to how we might be able to supply some kind of facility for somebody who is trying to deal with fear or something. But I think mindfulness is something very new here, so people are a bit suspicious of it generally out there, you know, that's another bit of a problem. But I'll tell you one thing that's interesting. 2 years ago, a lady contacted me who had worked in the Institute of Human Resources, and she was writing a report. Then it turns out it's a book, which is a new handbook for new content for human resources in Kenya. And she asked me about mindfulness, and I gave her all the information. And she's put it in there as an intervention for occupational stress. So that's a new step that's actually happening. So that will be coming out soon, I understand, but I'm not sure when.
That's amazing.
But I think it should be in schools.
Yeah, it should be it should be basic. Like, that's the first thing we need to learn.
Yeah, they're doing it in schools in England now. From 10 years old, and it's having amazing results.
Wow.
Giving them a centeredness and an awareness, so that they're able to deal with the pressures. Because we go through and we get to a point of crisis, and then we have to unlearn all that stuff we've been taught, to relearn how to be aware and relearn how to respond. Seems rather strange that we actually have to do this. So I hope that talking with you will even give people a feeling that this is something worth pursuing and putting out there in these various institutions that need to address these issues.
And the question that probably most people would have is, who is this for? Who is this mindfulness for? Is there mindfulness for kids? Is there mindfulness for deaf people?
Okay, in the case of kids, there is a more specialized mindfulness teacher training that has been devised, specifically a more simplified form for like 10-year-olds. So they're doing that, I know, in a number of schools in Wales when I was last there, and in other parts of England. So that is beginning to happen. There isn't anyone to actually do that specific teacher training here, and I don't know, it might be available online, because so much more stuff is going online. Who is it for? It's for everybody, basically. I mean, in England, it's on the National Health Service. You get it for free, a whole 8-week course. There are several teachers teaching MPs in the Houses of Parliament for some years now, mindfulness practice. Imagine if that happened here.
That would be like life-changing.
Mind you, it's hard to know that was the case given the Brexit uproars, but let's leave that one.
Maybe it could have been worse.
It might have been. Yes, I think it needs to be out there. People will come to it for all kinds of different reasons. But essentially, you're simply awakening or cultivating or retrieving a natural capacity that everybody possesses, which can be cultivated to the point where your life becomes less stressful, less full of anxiety, you're able to make wiser decisions, you're less caught up in your conditioning and your reactivity. And that's the essential point for the therapeutic part of it. It's not for someone who's going through a serious traumatic crisis and needs psychotherapy. They should finish the psychotherapy before they do mindfulness. Or addiction, it could be applicable to the rehabilitation phase, but not. Mindfulness is used in certain addiction programs, that's for sure, but I'm not sure there are many here. I did have the head teacher at SAPTA come on my course.
All right, so if somebody is interested in mindfulness, is there a course that you're running or you're going to run?
Yeah, I have a website, and I think I will probably announce an 8-week course that would start around September, perhaps. I'm not sure of the dates yet, but I'm thinking along those lines. That it would have to be online with Zoom under the current circumstances, but it's possible to do.
Okay. And what about tips that you can give to people? Because I'm sure there's somebody who might not want to wait up until September to do the course. They want to get some little tips here and there that could help them on the journey towards, being mindful. What tips can you give to people?
Yes, that's difficult. I think they could go to the website. The website does give quite an in-depth sort of description of what this is all about. And they could contact me if they have something that they think mindfulness would apply, which they could maybe put some questions and I could answer those through the website.
Okay.
That's for sure.
All right.
That would be nice to hear from people. What can I do about this, or I do that, and I could say, well, in this situation, the best thing is to sit and do the following. But everything is specific to the particular occasion, because we're really just dealing with our experience, which is changing all the time.
All the time,
and actually being aware of it. As it unfolds, because it's constantly changing, constantly unfolding. And we get caught up in little knots which are created by the mind.
Wow, that has been so powerfully enlightening for me, and I'm sure it has been for our viewer. And we are so excited that you agreed to come and tell us about mindfulness. We know there's so much more that you can tell us, so many tips and so many experiences that you can share with us. And I'm hoping the viewer can just come to you or to us. We can also give you information of where to get David, or you can go directly to him. We'll leave the details of his website right there. And let's continue being mindful, and let's continue helping people to get to their peak emotional and mental state. So thank you so much, David. Do you have a parting shot for the viewer?
Be mindful every day.
That's a fantastic parting shot. And from me is thank you so much for sharing, for being here, for liking, for commenting. Please don't forget to click the subscribe button and to click the bell so that you don't miss any of these episodes. Share with your friends, share your experiences, and most importantly, take action. Contact David, start your mindfulness practices, and let's get mentally and emotionally healthy together. Until the next episode, I've been your host, Caroline Gaidhuma, and it's bye-bye.